Welcome to History Pub.
So I'm Debbie Monsiv. I'm the president of Cottage Grove Genealogical Society, and we are the sponsor for tonight's History Pub. And I just want to make a few introductions. And I always say we're thankful for this venue. The Burkholder Woods building was built in 1908, and it's been serving Cottage Grove for a long time. And I want to thank Bart for the venue and prizes, and I want to thank the staff, Seth for sound, Jim Lockhart for videoing, and Jim Hoyt for speaking. Bill, sorry. I was talking to a Jim earlier. And so with all of that, the History Pubs are sponsored by the Partners in History, and those are the Cottage Grove Historical Museum, the Cottage Grove Genealogical Society, the Historical Society, the Cottage Grove City Library, Spirit of Bohemia Mining Days, Oregon Aviation Historical Society, and Singing Creek. They're the sponsors for 2026. And there's others in our community that help preserve history, and the Partners in History are in an effort to digitize the 1970s of the Cottage Grove Sentinel. And so on the tables there's some little things like this if you are interested, and Kathy down here on this table have envelopes to assist you to mail your donation. But on here it talks about what it costs per page. It's 75 cents a page, $20 approximately for an edition, and $400 for half of a reel? Wow. And $800 for a reel, $825, and $7,425 to do a year.
The whole 70s, the whole 70s.
Oh, the whole 70s?
That's the decade.
So in the past, we've had 2 donations from the Woodard Family Foundation that are in the works. And so I'm very thankful for their effort, but I'd really like to see the community step up and let's do the 70s.
Do the matching grant. Match.
Oh, yes. And the Friends of the Library offered a matching grant of $1,000 if we could raise $1,000. And thanks to some very generous donors, we have reached that $1,000, so we got that extra $1,000. And so I want to thank the Friends of the Library as well. And for the raffle tonight, the Genealogical Society's half of the pot will go towards the newspaper digitization project. So buy more tickets. So I want to introduce Bill Hoyt. He and his wife Sharon of 36 or 37?
36 and going on 30.
Okay, 37 years, own the Hawley Ranch just south of Cottage Grove. The ranch is almost on the Lane-Douglas County line, and he is the 5th generation to work that property. The Hawley Ranch is a donation land claim property which was procured by his great-great-grandparents Ira and Elvira Riley Hawley, who arrived in Oregon in 1852. Bill is from the Bitterroot Valley in Montana. He graduated from the University of Montana, served in the U.S. Air Force, and ranched in Montana until he moved to Oregon in 1978 to take over management of the family ranch from the 4th generation. Bill is a past president of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association and currently serves on the Oregon Beef Council. And I want to welcome Bill to the History Pub. And if anyone missed last January's, it's available on the Cottage Grove Partners in History YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for the introduction, Debbie. That was awesome. Makes me feel like I'm about 100 years old here. This fall will be 48 years that I have stewarded this land, and I every morning I get on my knees and I thank the Lord for having this opportunity that I have had in my lifetime to be able to steward. Saying that you own it is just not what happens. The land will be here a long time after I am, and we have a family cemetery on the ranch, and all 4 generations ahead of me are all there, and I go regularly, and my cousin Dave is here, and we talk about we steward that cemetery, and you can look at all of the generations ahead, including the founder. And I was telling these ladies just before we started that my great-great-grandparents, who I'll show you, are Ira and Elvira Hawley, and that's them. And they came to this country. They came to this country in 1852. They actually turned the paperwork in on the ranch in January of 1853, and they're buried on the ranch. And they had 12 children born to them in their lifetime, and only 6 lived to be adults. And in the cemetery, when you go up, you'll see there are a lot of little tiny stones that just say infant. They don't say a name. And it's quite it's a wrenching experience. But I am so proud that I've been able to steward this land for all these years. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk a little bit about the family and give you some background, and then the reason for this time we have together tonight is because I have always been fascinated with the journey that he took from the farm in Illinois to here. And I have wanted my whole life to go back and see it, and to get as close as I could to walk on that ground and then follow the journey all the way back to Cottage Grove. And so this fall of 25, I did that. And so I'm going to tell you, after I get done talking a little bit about the family, I'm going to tell you about this journey that I took, and show you some pictures and there's a couple of things that Dave, I share with Dave, and he doesn't know it yet, so he's gonna see something tonight that he's never seen before, and I'm going to share something with him that I found on this journey that we both share. So it was quite a trip. So let me talk just a little bit about Ira. Ira Hawley was born in 1816 in Rome, New York, and his family goes back to the 1600s in New England, and he was a traveler. This guy, I mean, he's a man after my own heart, because he, as a young man, he traveled all around, and when he was in his late 20s, his late teens, he took off and went to Illinois, and he went over the Erie Canal and down and ended up in western Illinois. And he wanted to be a farmer, so he started farming there. Elvira, on the other hand, his wife, she came from Kentucky, and her family had been in Kentucky for generations before that. And interestingly enough, and I'm going to talk a little more about this in more detail, but her father was a man named William Riley, and her maiden name was Riley, and he turns out, and he was a major in the cavalry. And when I got on this trip, I've just been fascinated with history. So I don't know how many of you are really familiar with the Black Hawk War, but there was a treaty between the Indian tribes, the Sacs and another tribe, that in 1804, that ceded the ground that they had east of the Mississippi in along the western edge of Illinois and the northern part of Wisconsin, and they made this treaty with the Indians, which the U.S. government took and basically told the Indians that, okay, this ground is going to be ours, but as soon as we get it set, you can stay there as long as until we get it settled with settlers from the east, and then you got to move. So I had no idea about this. So in 1832, this all came together, and the treaty was in 1804. By the late 18 teens, the Indians were getting kind of figuring out that they were going to have to move. In the early 1830s, 1830, 1831, the government, the U.S. government came to the Sauk Indians and says, we're going to displace you from your grounds, and we're going to send you to the west side of the Mississippi into Iowa, and that's where is going to be your ground, and east of the Mississippi is going to be, now we're going to let settlers come and take the ground, so you're going to be displaced. And one of the chiefs of the Sauk tribe was a guy named he was the Indian that actually stirred up the tribes and got them to going to fighting against them, and so there was a I want to get my facts right. They in 1831 he decided, and his name was Mohawk. So he decided that he was going to go to war, and the Indian tribes were a little bit, they weren't all on the same page. Some of them wanted to fight with him, and some of them didn't. And this was a very short-lived, 1832 was the whole length of it. It started in April of 1832. There were 6,000 tribesmen on both these two tribes that were going to be displaced. And there was about half of them went to war. And so Elvira Riley, and the war took place on the west side of Illinois, and that's where Ira Hawley was farming, or was going to farm. And Elvira's father, his name William Riley, was a major in the cavalry and fought in every single engagement in 1832, and he liked that country in the west side of Illinois so well that he settled there. And so one of the first things I'm going to talk about that Dave and I share is the family history said that Ira and Elvira were married on her 18th birthday in a little town of Galesburg, Illinois. Now, I've heard this most of my life, and so I decided on this trip, I'm going to go to Galesburg, Illinois, and see where they got married. So I trooped myself, left my wife in the truck, and went. They had to go through security and everything and get up into the courthouse. Went to the archives. This nice lady in the archives, I told her my story, and she said, well, wait a minute, let me look. And Dave, I was given, she found, and I was given a copy of their wedding license. And now this is our great-great-grandparents. And they were married on the 1st of March, which is her 18th birthday, 1841, and I have a copy. I found a copy on this trip of their wedding license. So that was pretty cool. And so my next adventure was to say, all right, Ira and Elvira packed up and came to Oregon. But there's been a lot of controversy on Ira supposedly made 2 trips. And we had some archival evidence that he took her with him. Not so. Okay. So, but he did make 2 trips. When the 49ers discovered gold in California he decided he got the fever. He was in Illinois. Now, he'd already traveled from Rome, New York to Illinois and was farming there. And so in 1849, early 1850, he packs up. Now, he did not know, we're not sure, but his wife was pregnant. And that's one of the reasons why we know she didn't go and on the first trip. But she was a ways off. And so he took off, he and a buddy, and as the family story goes, they rode 2 horses and had a mule and 2 horses and rode to California. And the cool part about this trip is we don't know how it happened, but he made $5,000 on the trip. Now in 1850, $5,000 was a lot of money. And so he talks about hiding the money on his person in pouches and stuff. And then when we don't know whether he actually earned that money panning gold or whether he earned it selling his claim or both. But chances are either one may be reasonable. But he hired on, so he did, in order to kind of not bring attention to himself, he hires on as a drover that with a bunch of guys that are driving a herd of cattle across the San Joaquin Valley to San Francisco. And he writes down in his journal that every night there was a whole herd of people, this is a big herd of cattle. And every night he says they killed a steer, and by morning it was gone. So they moved across the valley, and then when he got to San Francisco, you know, if it had been me, I'd have been a drunk sailor. $5,000, shoot, I'd have got first class travel all the way back. But not Ira, he hires on as a waiter on a steamship going around the Horn and back to New York. And he works his way all the way back. So then he comes back to Illinois, and he gets back to Illinois, and he's been gone almost 2 years. And his wife has had this baby, and now there are 3 children that he has in Illinois, and his wife. And everybody wonders, and when I got back there to see the proximity of the 2 farms of Elvira's, her dad's mom and dad had a place, it becomes really logical when you get there to look that he left her with her parents. Now there's no evidence of that. No, and there's nothing written, but he didn't just leave her. It says he left her on the farm, but it was the farm. It had to have been the farm of her parents or very close proximity. And so when I got back to Illinois, I was looking for both the Riley farm and also the Hawley farm. So he had 3 children. They had 3 children, 2, 4, and 9, in 1852. Now, what has always been a wonder to me is they get in a wagon with 2 other guys and an outrider and a young man that was just traveling along with them. And they had 3 wagons total in their little convoy, and they headed for Oregon. Now, in retracing those steps, the 9-year-old he writes in his journal all that he remembers about every one of the stops. Now, I'm gonna take you through some of my pictures, but before I do. This is taken on the ranch. This is Ira and Elvira standing on the porch. We're thinking this is in the late 1880s. So we have that house burned down in 1959, which is tragic. And my grandfather, I was telling these ladies, he was the first generation was Ira, and he left the ranch to his youngest son, Jim Hawley. Jim Hawley had a daughter, and she was Alcea Hawley, and then she left it to my parents, and then I came to me. Now, my mother was the daughter of the granddaughter of one of the Hawley children. As I said, they had 12 children, 5 boys, 1 girl. I'm descended from the girl. The girl's name was Medora Ann Hawley, and she's my mother's grandmother. And so as the ranch came down that way. But one of the interesting things was that Alcea Hawley, my grandfather was orphaned when he was 4 years old. So in 1888, which is about the time this picture was taken, his mother died. And she's buried in our cemetery, and her name was Medora Ann, as I said. And my grandfather's father was working for the railroad that came through here, and he took off and never came back. And my grandfather never really knew his father, and there's a kind of a weird side story to that, but his name was Frank Stockwell, and he was a handsome guy. I don't know if you can't see that, but he was just double handsome. And he married the rancher's daughter. But when he took off, he went to, everybody said, the family story said, well, he was killed in a train wreck. Nah. He went to Texas and married another rancher's daughter. And I have a whole set of cousins. I have a whole set of cousins in Texas that I've never met, that are my great-grandfather's second family. So, but anyway, my grandfather, he raised an orphan, and was kind of the chore boy of the family, and he hated it. He told the family his whole life. I mean, he was in his late 80s when he passed, and he told me, he said, I worked my whole life to get away from that place, and all you want to do is get back. So he was kind of one of those. When this house, and the way I got to this story, I'm kind of getting in a circle here, but the house burned in '59, and Alcea was the owner of the ranch, and she called my grandfather and said, what should I do? They say I can rebuild it. Now this house is a historic site, and my grandfather, because he just disliked the situation so poorly, said burn it down. And she called the Cottage Grove Fire Department, and they came out to the ranch and burned it the rest of the way down. Oh my God, it's so sad. And my mother was so upset with her father for doing that, it's just hard to believe. But anyway, that's what that house brings to my mind. So this is their 5 boys. This is the 5 boys that survived, so on the right is Nirom, the oldest, and then Bob, then Jim, the youngest, then George, and then on the far left, Will. And so those 5 boys, Bob, the one on the second from the right, he was the one who he owned most of Cresswell in that area. They all, Will was over in Lorain. They had farms all over the place around this country, and they left a huge legacy. Now this is Ira and Elvira and my grandfather when he was about 12. Okay, so now we're back to Illinois. So I want to take you through my trip, and that's why I'm here, basically to talk about some of the things that happened on the trip. So when we got to Galesburg and found that the wedding license, I found where the farm was. There was a little town called Rio. My wife tells me it's Rio, R-I-O, and then there was 2, Henderson Grove and North Henderson. And in Henderson we found where the actual farm site was, and this is the cemetery, the Henderson Cemetery. And that is the site basically where Ira's farm was, and Elvira's was not very far away. But you can see they're still farming. Now, the second thing I want to tell my cousin Dave is I found in the Henderson Grove Cemetery the grave site of our great-great-great-grandfather. 3 greats. We share that, Dave and I share that, and I stood at his headstone, and that is Elvira Riley's father, Major William Riley. And so that was pretty cool. And that is part of the Riley farm that where Ira's family was farming. Now, the first thing that they did on this journey, which really blew me away, was they had to cross the Mississippi. Now, it's only about 60 miles from Henderson Grove to the Mississippi River. Now, in those days, the wagons had to be ferried across the Mississippi. And so this is what the closest bridge that I could find. And I didn't know exactly where they crossed, but and the only place that you could cross an automobile was at Burlington, Iowa. And so this is the bridge at Burlington, Iowa, looking north up the Mississippi River. So they got to Burlington and they headed through Iowa. Now, Iowa is just farm ground the whole way. And they went from Burlington. We know the next place we know that they stopped was at Council Bluffs, Iowa. And there was a little town called Kearney. And that's where they got provisions for the rest of the trip going across Nebraska and Wyoming. And so we know that they stopped there, and there's a museum there, but when I got there it was closed. And I wanted to go through the museum in Council Bluff, and Council Bluff is a twin city with Omaha, Nebraska. So, and those of you who've been out there, it's on the Missouri River. And so we traveled across Iowa and headed for Council Bluffs. Now, we got to Council Bluffs, and I couldn't find that museum, and it was that was probably the biggest disappointment for me of the whole trip. Was the traffic in Omaha and Council Bluffs was worse than Portland. It was terrible, and so we started across Nebraska. Now, I fell in love with Nebraska. I'm going back this fall. It was one of the most interesting places for me. We stayed in Lincoln, and we followed the trail up you hit the Platte River, and according to what the Hawleys talked about how they traveled up the Platte. Now, as I did my research for this trip, I discovered that I had no idea there were 2 trails. One trail was on the north side of the Platte River, and one was on the south. And the Mormon Trail was coming from, if you look at the Oregon Trail and you think about, well, where did it actually start? The Oregon Trail actually started in Independence, Missouri. And if you see where Independence, Missouri is in relation to Council Bluff, Iowa, it's way south. So it was coming up from the south, and the Oregon Trail stayed on the south side of the Platte River. The Mormon Trail was on the north, coming from more of northerly in Illinois, and it followed on the north side of the Platte River. So Ira, coming from Illinois, I discovered he was following the Mormon Trail. It was parallel to the Oregon Trail, but he followed the Mormon Trail as it went through Nebraska, or Iowa and Nebraska. So about halfway through Nebraska, which is, I just really fell in love. There was several forts along major forts along the trail, and these were places where the pioneers could provision, and they could do repairs on their wagon. I mean, we all get flat tires, and they got flat tires on wagon trains, And so this is at Fort Kearney, and Fort Kearney is about midway along the Platte River, and they had a complete place where they did wagon repair. This is I didn't want my wife to put this in because I was standing in front of this building, but this is the building in which they did the wagon repairs, and that is what's inside the building. So they had it was a huge blacksmith shop. They could do almost any type of repair for wagons that you could think of. And now it is a historic site, and there's another picture of inside of it. You can see the parts of the wagons that are still left. And of course, we went through the whole Fort Kearny. We went through all of it. We spent about half a day walking around. It's a huge grounds, and they have this original old wagon on as part of the. It says on the plaque it says Oregon on that little wood plaque on the bottom of it. So it was very interesting for me to see how these. I mean, what was continually on my head was, it's taken me a day to drive in my pickup truck from from the Mississippi to the Missouri, and how long did it take them? And when I made the entire trip from Galesburg, Illinois to Cottage Grove, Oregon, I did it in 7 days. It took them 7.5 months. And I was constantly blown away by the weather and all the things that they had to go through, and how motivated they had to be. And when you look as far as you can see, it's nothing but flat. And you're thinking, wow. And so as we move forward, we got this is a little bit of it's called Dopey Town, and it's right outside of Kearny, Fort Kearny. And this is the old, this is a memorial of the Great Platte River Road, which is where the two trails paralleled the Platte River. Now that is the Platte River. So if you were to say to yourself, okay, if I wanted to cross over to the other side, it would not have been that easy in a wagon. And what he talks about is the places where they could cross. And I did a little research in my head saying, all right, you had to have, in order to cross a river, some of those larger rivers like the Mississippi and the Missouri, they had to be ferried. So here you have to have somebody who with either some type of a power on a flat barge type thing to get them across, or ropes to pull them across. And it had to have been quite a project. And the 9-year-old, he writes in his journal, there's a lot of tributaries into the Platte. The North Platte comes in, and he said when they crossed the North Platte, because they were on the north side, they had to cross the tributary coming in from the north. And he said they were waiting to be ferried across, and he said the wagons were stacked up so far to waiting to cross that they didn't get across till the middle of the night. And he said he fell asleep, and they woke up the next morning on the other side. So, I mean, it was, and he said one of the interesting things about this plane, and I noticed that, all of that country was so flat. He writes that at night, all of the wagon trains, the whole country was filled with wagons. 300,000 people came across on that, immigrated to the west coast or to the west side. And he said at night, every one of these wagon little groups had their own band. They had fiddles and harmonicas and guitars, and you could hear the music coming across the plains from all these other these different camps. So that must have been pretty interesting. But that's the Platte River, and you can see how it is could be very interesting to deal with. Now we moved into western Nebraska and Wyoming, and we headed from Fort Kearny. We headed for Fort Laramie, Wyoming, and we had to get we had to get up to Council Bluffs and then to go up through into Wyoming and head for South Pass. So you can see the wagon ruts on the left. So the countryside really changed. So here they are on through Iowa and Nebraska in this very flat, easy country, and now we get to western Nebraska and Wyoming, and things start to get a little different. And by then, here you've been on the trail for 3 or 4 months, and your stock's got to be tired. I mean, I'm a horseback, 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, and if I got a long way to go, my horses can't. I mean, and to think about what they had to do, a horseback, and have oxen and mules that were and draft horses that were pulling those wagons. My goodness. I mean, and to go that kind of distance over that kind of country blew me away. So in southern and eastern Wyoming, they have a couple of monuments to the trail, and where it goes up before it gets to South Pass, and very, very interesting country. This is at Fort Laramie, very close to Fort Laramie. This was one of the houses that people would stop and fix their wagons. It was called Windlass Hill, and that was the Pioneer Homestead there. And then Ash Hollow was another place where you could see the wagon ruts. And that's looking down from the top of Ash Hollow, where the wagons came down off the hill. That is Fort Laramie. Now, Fort Laramie was very, very interesting to me because that's where several very monumental things happened at Fort Laramie. One, if you were headed for California and not Oregon, that's where the trail left. So everyone went here. Then after that, you decided whether you're going to go to Oregon or whether you're going to go to California. And the trail went south to California and then went straight east or west and north to Oregon. Unfortunately for my trip, and I'm going to revisit the last half of the trip this year because the government shut down this year in 2025 when we all experienced the government shutdown. The day that I arrived at Fort Laramie, and I met the superintendent at the gate, and he shut the gate and said, "I'm sorry, but the government is shut down and there is no entrance into Fort Laramie." So all I could do was take pictures of it from a distance. So, and turns out that my next place that I was headed after Fort Laramie was Fort Hall in Idaho, and it too was shut down. So I wasn't able to get into there. So I'm going to revisit those two places and actually get on the grounds if the government's not shut down again. That's some of the ruins of Fort Laramie still. There's just so much to see there that you're going, dang. I wish I just didn't get a chance to walk around on it. This is Fort Platte, and it is not very far from Fort Laramie, but just a little north. And they would not let us on to actually walk around, but we could see it from that distance. Then we got into Wyoming and we went to what's called Registered Cliff. Now there's a lot of places, including South Pass, where the pioneers wrote their names in the cliff, and they're still there. And so really interesting. You can walk up that, you see that whole, how that cliff is huge, and there's names written almost all the way to the top of different the year and the name they were that whoever the pioneer was and what year they were there, and what is I started with this about telling you about the Mohawk Wars and how the Indians were being displaced, and a little trivia about Register Cliff that nobody wants to talk about much. is the Indians, in the Plains Indians in Wyoming also used this as to write their special history down, and it got covered up by the pioneers. And not very many people know that either. So it was, I really did a lot of research trying to follow this along so it was more meaningful. There's another, you can see in the rock where the carvings are. That's a little closer. Now I'm going to show you some. This is in Wyoming where they came over a mountain, and it was quite an interesting deal. And they had this sign for the ruts, and there they are. Now I was blown away by how deep they were. I mean, when you look at taking wagons through there, and over time, so many wagons going that it cut that trough so deeply into the side of the mountain. It was pretty dramatic. So I got to walk along that a little bit. Then this is in South Pass when we get there, and I was actually blown away. If you can read, it says D.A. Hawley, and that is cut into a rock in South Pass. And South Pass, Wyoming. So I was, and it had to have been done by the 9-year-old. And anyway, that was quite an interesting experience. So you can see this is going to be. I'm going to talk a little bit about the trip from here. Most of you are familiar with from Fort Hall to Cottage Grove, following down the Snake and the Columbia. Everybody has been down there. I'm going to tell a couple stories about it, but I don't have a lot of pictures. But this is the map showing Fort Fetterman, Fort Platte Bridge, and then Independence Rock, South Pass. So we're actually going from Wyoming. If you come up from down in the far right-hand corner here is the edge of where Wyoming and Nebraska meet. And then the Platte River comes up, and the North Platte actually flows into it. And so the trail followed. Now, I ended up with a lot of issues about this part of the trip because there isn't a lot written down. And one of the things they say is that where you see Salt Lake down here, the 9-year-old writes that we came into a canyon that was going directly west, and we came out where at what we now think is Ogden, Utah. I traveled around all these little bitty roads, and I found this one canyon and a little tiny little windy 2-lane road, and it came out at Ogden, Utah. Now I can't swear to you that was the exact canyon that they took. But what is interesting to me is we know that they were at South Pass. But it would seem to me that going up, going through Jackson Hole, obviously that part of the country between South Pass and Fort Hall was very difficult. Really high mountains and really difficult pass. So they went south to Fort Bridger. Now somewhere between Fort Bridger and Ogden is north of Salt Lake. So if you go, maybe an inch up there north of Salt Lake, and you see where Fort Bridger is, they found a canyon that came across to just in a very straight line north of Salt Lake City. And then they ended up at Fort Hall, which is way up there. Now, they say the Oregon Trail went this way, but my ancestors didn't do that, because we know that they came out, he says they came out of what is now Ogden, Utah. So it's very much of a conundrum for me, because you can see where the historians draw the Oregon Trail, but it doesn't match up with what my ancestors have written down. So I'm going back this summer, and I'm going to spend a couple weeks in that part of the world. and I'll come back and give you a short report of exactly what I found. But as you can tell, I have become obsessed with this journey, and I am very. It's been a very special thing to me. But so when they got to Fort Hall, they got provisions, and Fort Hall was very similar to Fort Laramie, where there was all these different places to fix your wagons and things. And then according to the family history, they left and went to along the Snake River. And when they got to Twin Falls, those of you who've been along the Snake at Twin Falls, very, very deep canyon. And so they went down for water, to get water. And the 9-year-old, he says on the way out of the canyon at Twin Falls, back up to the trail, which then they were on the Snake, they were on the north side of the Snake. And he said his horse couldn't make it with him on there, it was so steep. So he got off and he held on to his horse's tail and he let his horse pull him up the trail. But about halfway he slipped and fell, and the horse kicked him in the face. Now here's this 9-year-old gets kicked in the face, and you're going, and you know, and in his 80s he writes this, he's writing these memories down, and he said it ruined his good looks for the rest of his life. So I would have given anything to meet him, and he was Nirom was the oldest, and I'm very blessed that he left here and cowboyed in Southern Oregon. And this is kind of an aside that I wasn't going to bring up, but I'll do it because I started in it. But Nirom Hawley left Cottage Grove, and he was in his late teens. And he went down, cowboyed in Southern Oregon and Lakeview and around, and he ended up, because there was a backwash in those days, in the 1880s, or 1870s, he went. There was free land to be. And one of my cousins called me one day and said, "Bill, why did they pick Cottage Grove?" I said, "That's a no-brainer, you guys. It was free land. That's why they did it. You could homestead here, and you get so many acres if you put your stakes down." And so they were still having that in western Idaho. So he ends up outside of Moscow, Idaho, and he homesteads a farm there and starts farming. And I am blessed that his great-grandson is still farming there, and I'm friends with him, and his name is Lee Hawley, and he is a great guy. And he was just here and visited about a month ago, and he took me, when I visited him in Moscow and saw the farm, he took me to the farm that Nirom Hawley had, the exact place that he had homesteaded. So that was a pretty big deal. But so as they left and went, he writes down that they camped at La Grande. And I was going, at some point, and I'm not sure where, they had to cross from the north of the Snake to south of the Columbia. Now that was, and we don't know much about that, but we know they were on the north side of the Snake, and we know they ended up on the south side of the Columbia. We don't know where, and we don't know how. But he talks about camping at where they stayed at La Grande. But the other thing is, you know, those of you who are familiar with Eastern Oregon, you know where Union is? Okay, there's a little canyon and a road, you can drive it today, and I drove it, that goes up over the hill and comes out in the valley where gosh. Anyway, when you come out into the valley there, just what's the name of that little town that's there? My head just gone away with all these facts. But anyway, they went over the mountain and came down at Union and then went to La Grande. And we know that for a fact. So now they're on the south side of the Columbia, and they're headed, pardon me?
Halfway?
Well, yeah, it's halfway is one of, but what's the name of the town that's in that valley? Not some, it's close. You're getting there. No, Enterprise is not. Baker City. So they come down into Baker City and then they come back, and they were headed for North Platte and then North Powder. They got to North Powder, and then they went from North Powder up over the hill to Union, and then to La Grande. So now they're on the south side of the Columbia, which is, and there's some really interesting facts about how they came down to Oregon City. So they're headed for the Dalles, and he talks about where they crossed, and they had to be ferried across several of the rivers. And when they got to the Deschutes, I went up the Deschutes far enough to see this. It's still there. He writes in 1852 that there was a riffle where the Deschutes gets really shallow, upstream from the Columbia about half a mile, is what he says. And the wagon came down to that riffle, and they crossed it, just drove across it. And I found that riffle, which was very cool. And so then he writes there was two guys. One was a horseback and one was a foot. And they were headed for Oregon City. And the guy a horseback was sick. Now, you know, there was a lot of death happened for sickness on the trail. And so they got across. Well, the guy, the healthy one, shows up at their camp that night. And he says, my brother is sick. And Elvira Hawley, she said, bring him, I'll make him a meal and we'll get him healed up. And she doctored him. And she was basically the nurse. And when I said to last year's group, and one of the things that I have so much admiration, Elvira Hawley, after they made it down, there's several more stories. They went over the Barlow Road and came down at Oregon City, and then they headed down the valley. And Ira writes, he writes in his journal that all the good places in 1852 were taken as he came down the valley. So he ends up here in Cottage Grove. Now, what does that say? Anyway, so but Elvira, all the way on this whole trip, she doctored people. She made meals for people that she didn't know. Anybody would show up at their camp, she fed them. And when she got here to Cottage Grove, she became the midwife. I couldn't figure out for most of my life, well, why did she become the midwife? Turns out that her mother was a midwife in Illinois and had been a midwife in Kentucky. And so she came by that naturally. And I said to the last year when I spoke here at this thing, you know, I venerate my great-great-grandparents and Ira Hawley. I mean, what a life. He was what a guy. But the real hero in my family story is his wife. She was, without her, those kids and all those people that she helped would have had a lot harder if they would have made it at all. She's the real hero of this family. So anyway, we got here to Cottage Grove, and in 1853 he put his stakes down on the ranch, which is about 5 miles from here, and here we are. 770 years later, we're still here. So anyway, well, I just, is there anybody have any? Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions if you have any. No, I did not. That's a great question. I did it in the fall. They left from Galesburg, Illinois, or Knox County in April of the year, so in the spring, and traveled all year. Got here to Cresswell in October or early November, and they were in Cresswell. Actually, he put stakes down in Cresswell, and he rode up on the mountain. And you know what's interesting about this country is there's way more timber here than there used to be. when Ira was here in 1852, you could ride up on the mountain and see the whole valley. And he rode down on the crest of the mountain, and he talks about it. Comes out there on our place, which is basically, you know, at the last flat place in the valley, and just before you drop to go to Curtin, and he sees that valley, and he rides down there. Another great story is when he got to the bottom of the valley, there were two guys who had built a cabin across I-5. So you know where most of you know where the ranch is. On the other side of I-5, there were two guys that had a cabin, and they were just squatting there. And when Ira showed up, they told him they wanted to go down to Jackson County because they discovered gold in Jackson County, and they wanted to go down there and pan for the gold, and Ira bought them out of their cabin. He said, "I'll give you $150, which I thought was a lot of money. You know, like give you, you know, $600,000 for your house. So anyway, he gives them $75, and he rides back to Cresswell. It took him 2 weeks to ride back to Cresswell and get back to our place and pay him the other $75. He gave him half the money, and he said, "I'll give you the other half when I get back." And that's how he started. And the stories about that where I-5 cuts through, I would give anything to see I-5 be gone, but on the other hand, if I could build this great bridge over the ranch, I would. But he talks about being chased by wolves. Now, you know, I'm politically savvy, and I know what the wolf. I debated at the University of Oregon's law school a decade ago on wolves in Oregon, and I did not tell him that there were wolves in Cottage Grove in the 1860s, but he was chased by a wolf across the flats where I-5 goes right now, and he writes about that. So, I mean, trying to tame this country at that point would have been another really interesting ride. So, we go the old wagon road at the end of Dugan Lane. Okay, there's a gate there, and that goes on to, and that's the original wagon road.
Right.
Okay, so my pasture comes back and goes up on the hill there, and there's a pond up there in the corner, and yada yada yada. But that piece is about 450 acres. I believe it was added later. Now, I don't know that for a fact. I don't think it was part of the original. The Hawleys, Jim Hawley, which was Ira's youngest son, took over for him. He was a wheeler dealer. His story here in Cottage Grove is incredible. I mean, he lent people money. Dwayne, did any of you know Dwayne Coop? He's passed away, but he came to me and told me when he was a kid, Dwayne Coop was a kid, he borrowed money from Jim Hawley to buy his first car. And Jim Hawley was like the banker. And you couldn't go to the bank. If you needed money, you went to Jim Hawley. So he added pieces to the ranch. So the ranch is larger now than it was when Ira started. He got 700 acres. It's probably double of what it was in 1853. Because the way the land grant system went, you get 350 acres per person. So husband and wife could get 700 acres, and that's what they did in 1853. And so he added to it. Yes, sir. No, not until the 1880s, until the late 1870s. The Southern Pacific came through there, and they built the railroad that is there now, and it runs through the middle of the ranch. And there was an interesting, back in the early 1900s, the railroad, when they were still using steam engines, they built a Y so they could water the steam engines in between. If you go down Highway 99 now, between Highway 99 and I-5, there was a railroad Y there. And they would take the steam engines and water them and turn them around because you couldn't, there was not the one-way deal that they do now. And they abandoned that in the 1930s, 1940s. And it took our family, and my dad finally got it done. It took us 40 years to buy that Y back from the railroad, but we got it back from them. But so, and it you know, you can still see that where it's raised, where they had the steam engines going. But I mean, I could stand here all night long and talk to you about, you know, all the things that you know, I remember from being you know, my earliest memories are when I was about 6, 8 years old on the ranch. And if you go up Kennedy Lane, and don't tell anyone this, please, 'cause I didn't get a permit to do it. Up Kennedy Lane, on the right-hand side as you go up Kennedy Lane, there's a great big red barn. I keep my horses there. And the hayloft of that barn, when I was 8 years old, was probably the scariest place that I have ever been in my life. I mean, great big cobwebs, dead animals hanging from the rafters. It was just, I mean, it was really, and there was no windows in it. And today it's my happy place because I turned that hayloft into my office. I put 11 windows in the upside of the barn. I did get a permit to change the electricity, but I don't tell the mayor I didn't get a permit to do the building. So anyway, it's I sit there every morning, and I have my private time. I feed my horses, and I sit there at my desk and I look around at all, and I have all the family memorabilia around me in my office, and I spend some time in my Bible, and I say my prayers, and I thank the Lord for having given me this opportunity and the time I've got to spend here, and the wonderful friends and relations that I have in Cottage Grove. And I mean, I'm so blessed.